The protests currently sweeping across the Wall Street, various American cities, Western Europe, UK and other developed countries had been long coming. While protesters were out in the streets in Tunisia, Egypt, Middle Eastern countries, even a laid-back country like India, it was only a matter of time when the protesters would be out on the streets, even in the Western Europe. The reason behind the Wall Street protests are very clear. In the last 60 years in America, inflation-adjusted wage rates haven't grown. That means wage rates that the average working class employee in America earns has remained same and has in fact dipped compared to what it was in 1950 if it was to be adjusted against inflation. At the same time, the CEO pay, inflation adjusted, has increased by 300%. So the anger of the common man in America was long coming. It's just that they were not able to see the facts. Also, when even the common man had a heated room, had a car, he had the illusion that he was living pretty happily. But at the end of the day, man's happiness does depend upon how his neighbors are. And in a country where inequality has been growing to the extent that America today ranks below India, it ranks below China, it ranks below Iran in terms of inequality. That's the magnitude of inequality that's present in America today. The top 1% of Americans own about 42% of the national wealth, while the top 5% own about 70%. And when you have a country like this, where the CEO pays have been going up and up, while the unemployment rate has also been going up, the average wage earner hasn't been getting any kind of money increase, people had to come out on the streets. And that is exactly what has happened finally in America. What is surprising is that despite the recession, profits in the corporate American sector are at an all-time high minus a small period of 2007 just before recession. That means profits are at an all-time high, unemployment rate is also at an all-time high, and that is the amount of exploitation that has been taking place in America, and pretty much similar is the case in most of the Western and developed nations. So what is the exact problem? The exact problem in America is with capitalism and the basic tenet of capitalism. The big problem with capitalism is with its basic tenet of survival of the fittest. Survival of the fittest was a jungle law. It was a theory of evolution, and it said that only the fittest will be able to survive. A civilization is, however, an attempt to discard jungle laws. That's what civilization is all about. You discard jungle laws. However, there is one jungle law that we are refusing to discard, and that is survival of the fittest. And that's what capitalism bases itself upon. And this is the big problem with capitalism. This is the reason why people are today out on the streets. People are out on the streets today because this concept of survival of the fittest is making fitter people more fit and more fit. That is, richer people more rich and more rich, while the poor, who are obviously in a disadvantageous position, are becoming more and more marginalized by the day. And this is a law that every economy needs to take care of, because in our families, we don't believe in survival of the fittest. We believe in survival of the weakest. We take care of the weakest child, of the weakest father whose ill may be the most. We invest most on them so that they survive, because that's a more humane law of existence. Survival of the fittest is the most inhuman law of existence. It was perfect for the jungle, but it needs to be discarded by a civilized world. And this is what capitalism is refusing to do. And if capitalism needs to survive, it needs to discard survival of the fittest as its law, as its basic tenet of existence, and change it into survival of the weakest. Because today the world is united like never before. Knowledge and information presented logically reaches everybody in split seconds, and people are ready to come out on the streets. What the world is going to witness in the next few years is something it has never witnessed in past. There would be regular protests, and people will be coming out on the streets like never before in the history of mankind, thanks only to the internet, because people are realizing their power. People are coming close, people are getting united, social networking is bringing them close, and they are today ready to come out on the streets to protest against each and every kind of exploitation. And finally, the world is going to see a revolution from the masses. And remember, the masses is what the working class is all about. It is the same masses is the proletariat that Karl Marx talked about. And these masses are getting united and coming out on the streets because the masses are going to refuse outrightly the acceptance of a world where the rich 1% own about 42% of a nation's wealth. They are going to reject this law, and only that political party is going to win, which promises a more equitable society, which promises that this 42% of the wealth that the top 1% are cornering is going to be more equally distributed amongst the rest of the population. Because at the end of the day, it belongs to the masses. In America, the top 1% are today paying the least taxes in history. That's the power that they have garnered through their money. They lobby so hard that their taxes are going down and down, while the working class is being burdened by unemployment, is being burdened by diminishing wages, it's being burdened by lack of growth and lack of opportunities, where people are queuing up for jobs and yet finding no jobs. And this Occupy the Wall Street protests have a huge lesson for India. India just saw people coming out on the streets for the Jan Lokpal bill. But to me, that is important, but not as important as the fight against the massive exploitation that the government subjects Indians to. Today, according to official estimates, 37% of the Indians are below poverty line, and the poverty line has been shamefully defined at just about 30 odd rupees a day. This is so ill-defined that it is not poverty line. It should be called destitution line. Below this amount of meager 32 odd rupees, if you get, you are not poor, you are a destitute, you are fighting for survival. If we were to define the poverty line humanely, if we were to define poverty line with some respect, then today there would be more than 65% of India who would be falling below poverty line. And that is the reality of India. The reality of India is that 40% of Bombay is a slum. The reality of India is that a fifth of Delhiites don't have proper access to sanitation. The reality of India is that about 5 lakh people still carry human excreta on their heads to make a living. The reality of India is just about 250 odd towns have got proper sewer lines. And that is the reality of India. We have kept Indians poor like no other nation has. Our neighboring China has taken out 200 million people from below the poverty line to above the poverty line in the last 40 odd years. And that is why foreign direct investment flows into China so easily, despite it being a dictatorial country. Because China cares for its people. And while the Western world waits breathlessly to see when will people come out in China and topple their government, the fact is that people in China are constantly seeing the government taking care of its people, the government providing facilities to its people, education, health. They are bringing people out of poverty line, and therefore people in China, despite dictatorship, are not as angry today as people in the world's largest democracy called America. They are angry because in America there is more exploitation than the exploitation that is taking place in China today. In the last 60 years in America, the average hourly wage of the working class has decreased, inflation adjusted, and not increased, while the CEO pays have increased by 300%. That's the reality of America. And that is why people are out in the streets in America. The revolution is sweeping across the Western world. Every day it's gathering more and more momentum. Finally, Americans are unable to smoke them out because the people that they hate are in every second household. And every second household man is today angry about what is happening to their future and their children's future. And that is why what is happening in America is not a one-off thing. It is going to be a sustained, long-drawn process. And this revolution will only gather more and more momentum. The momentum would be so strong and huge that it will change capitalism. It will bring an end to capitalism the way we have known it over the last 100-odd years. Because at the end of the day, capitalism does cater to the inherent human need of feeling free masters of our life. But free masters of our life not at the cost of others' lives. Free masters of our life while giving a dignity of living to everybody else around us. That is humane. That is large-heartedness. And that is what capitalism needs to evolve into to remain alive and sustain. The biggest problem with capitalism has been survival of the fittest as its basic tenet. What it's going to do is bring a new and more humane tenet to capitalism. And survival of the weakest is what capitalism requires. Otherwise, it's going to be the end of capitalism.